I have a testimony. I have a testimony.
Welcome to another episode of Testimony Service Podcast. Today we have with us David Z. So glad to have you here. We thank God for your obedience and sharing your testimony, and we thank him for what he's done in your life, through your life thus far. Whenever you're ready, it's on you.
Okay. Yes, my name is David, and David Z is what I go by, because that literally is a testimony in and of itself. And so my name did not start with David. I actually grew up Muslim. My mom was Muslim, my father was Muslim, and my stepmom was Hare Krishna. And so I grew up in a, I would say, semi-Muslim household and culture. I stayed with my mom. I went to my dad's house and my stepmom's house on the weekends. And so I remember going to the mosque on Fridays with my dad, and then on Saturdays at my dad and stepmom's house, we would do what's called Bhagavad Gita class. My stepmom, again, was Hare Krishna, and so for those that may not know, that's a Hindu background faith. And so back then, I didn't know in regards to where I'm at now and what I know now. It was just growing up, that's what it was because you were a child. And so I didn't become a believer in Christ until I was 9. And so, and honestly, I didn't even know that my mom was Muslim until I was much older because by the time I was born, she wasn't necessarily practicing it. I didn't know that my parents actually were not married back then. I didn't find that out until my 30s. And so growing up, I just remember, again, on Fridays, going to the mosque, doing, I don't know if you want to call it the rituals, praying, putting your hands behind your head 5 times before you go into the mosque, taking your shoes off, bowing, and all these things. And so I do remember distinctly there was a particular moment in my childhood when I didn't have language for it then, but the language now is that my spirit didn't bear witness with it. As a child, it's just, you just know what you know. And so, although I was appreciative of, like growing up and what I thought then, you just walk in it. And so, there was a moment that I remember saying, I don't bear witness to this, although I still continue in it. And so, I do remember certain things, because it was a large family. I have 22 brothers and sisters, and it's about almost 50 nieces and nephews. And so that is broken down in a matter of different marriages and different relationships between my father, my mother, my stepmother. And I know that's a lot. I just remember being at my dad's house on the weekends, and there was 10 of us at the house, kids, and certain things I remember in regards to taking 5-minute showers. And if you didn't put your clothes in front of the bathroom to say, I'm next, you might have been taking a cold shower. I remember distinctly, I remember growing up watching my stepmom pray throughout the night. First person I ever saw up middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning, and praying and specifically chanting. And that'll be relevant once we get later in the testimony. And so there were also times to where before we ate at my stepmom's house, she would take the food and put it in. I don't know the proper name for it, but there was like a bookshelf that was turned into, I guess, a shrine, if you would call it, or an altar to dedicate the food. And so I didn't think anything of it then. It was just a practice back then. And so, but she was very diligent in her practices. And before we would eat, 30 minutes prior to, and we as kids, it's just like, I'm ready for this oatmeal, okay? I'm ready for this oatmeal. And, but that was her diligence to say, before we do anything, this food has to be dedicated. And so they would put the food in the altar, or again, I don't know the proper name for it, but it was pictures of, in her faith, it was these, I don't even know what they're called, but I just call them the blue people with the extended arms and multiple arms. And the symbols, and she would chant and dedicate the food prior to it hitting the table. And other things in terms of just growing up, on my mom's side, growing up with my mom, and there was two other siblings of mine that grew up in her household. I remember growing up specifically with anger issues, and to the point to where even today, I don't know how bad it was. You would literally have to talk to my brother and sister. There's only two moments that I remember memory-wise in regards to how bad it was. And I remember stabbing my brother with a fork when I was a kid. For what reason? I don't know. And I do also remember there was a particular time of when I would just have these outbursts. And I guess you can call it rage back then. And I remember my dad one day, he came over to the house and he didn't want us listening to certain music. And Jay-Z back then, I was listening to this Jay-Z album, and my dad wanted, or not album, actual cassette tape, for those folks that know what a cassette tape is. And my dad asked for it, and I was so against it. And me and my dad got into an argument, and my brother, one of my brothers at the time, it was something in which how he said it that made me release it, because my brother said to me, he said, "You don't want to fight with dad." And not that my dad was physical or anything like that, but it was something in my brother's voice that he knew something that I didn't know at the time. And so I didn't want to give it up, though. I was very adamant about my stance. And even still to this day, when I look at my life, I'm adamant about certain things. And it's hard to sway me because I stand on certain things. And back then, that particular Jay-Z CD or cassette, I'm sorry, I did not want to give that up because I felt like it was mine. I didn't think that my father could invoke his right upon mine. And then especially when, like, not necessarily growing up in the house with your father, it was a little bit there in terms of, like, who are you to come over here? Wasn't a whole lot of that, but I was stark on my stance. And so when my brother said, "You don't want to fight with dad," he talked me through it, and I gave my father finally that cassette tape. But it wasn't without a lot of anger and outburst and rage and resistance. And so there's these moments that I think about growing up, and again, growing up Muslim, growing up Hare Krishna, growing up in this environment that when I look back at it now, I can see how the enemy was trying to already plot and plan for things not to come forth in regards to what my life looks like now. And so specifically, I began to follow Christ at 9. And a part of what that story looks like, I didn't find out until after my mom passed in regards to how I became Christian. And so I'll say that a little bit later. But what I will say now is that there was divine timing and a divine release in regards to the Lord telling me how I became a believer in Christ, in regards to the backstory that you don't know, the things going on behind the scenes and God orchestrating things that you have no idea about in terms of what he's doing. And so what I will say right now is that I went to Freedom Chapel. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. And so Freedom Chapel was off of Kinsman. And that's the place where I started going to church. And eventually at 9 years old, I'll never forget, is when I had my own personal decision to follow Christ at 9. And I was sitting in front of my home where I stayed at the time. I always talk about a 4889 Banbury Court, and accepting Christ through, there was the Halls were the folks that cultivated and planted seeds in us. And so Miss Hall and Mr. Hall, Mr. Hall was the assistant pastor, I believe, at Freedom Chapel, and Miss Hall was his wife. And so somehow we began to start going to Bible study at their house. And so when that would happen, we just, were at their house sitting in their style, learning about Jesus. And they had sons, and I believe it was Brian and Clint. I don't remember if it was Brian or Clint that asked me at 9 years old, and my brother and sister, while we were sitting in the parking lot to accept Christ, because we would go to church at that point. We were on the drill team, for those that understand the old school drill team, and we had the basement, and we did the food after service down in the basement and all of that. And I enjoyed that space. And at 9, I accepted Christ. And it wasn't until I was 17, though, when my walk with Christ really started and that personal journey started. And so when I think about how that took place, I was in high school. I was known as the silly guy. I was known as the comedian. I was known as also, specifically my nickname was Hustle Man. And so I would sell almost anything and everything. I started off selling candy. I used to work at a store called Mark's. And I always had this entrepreneurial type of brain back then. And I remember working at the store. I was a stock boy. And they had candy that was 33 cents to the bar. And my brain said, okay, well, 33 cents, I can flip that for at least $1. I got a nice little profit. And so in high school, I would literally buy this candy, go to high school, and I would start to sell this candy. And when I tell you I had customers, I had customers looking for me in the hallways. And, it was a whole operation. I mean, they shut me down because it became too disruptive to the school. I mean, it was like a serious thing. And so ultimately what started to happen is not knowing back then how the organic kind of cultivation of the hunger would come just to sell. I began to look at this because I worked there. I had all the product in the back. And I said, well, if I steal it, I can actually make more money. And my best friend, his name was Chris, he worked at Mark's with me. And we started stealing the candy. And we started selling it and making even more profit. And so at that point, I was shut down at some point by selling the candy. And then I just moved on to a new product, and I was just more discreet. Even before then, got shut down with the candy. Then I started selling CDs and DVDs. This is where, when I started selling CDs and DVDs, this is where I got the nickname Hustle Man, because I was slanging them. Okay, this was back when LimeWire was out, and you ran the risk of like your whole computer being shut down if you download a LimeWire file and they got a virus on it. But I was one of those guys, and I mean, I was selling CDs 1 for $5, 2 for $10, 3 for $15. And back then, not that was a deal because they're all $5, but the way in which you say it, sometimes, and then I did custom deals. But I started selling CDs and DVDs, and that kind of took off. And then after a while, I don't know how I got introduced to it, but I'm going to back up a bit because I did grow up in a place called Banbury. Now, Banbury was notorious for literally the drugs, and I would say the killings. And I remember I grew up in the 90s. And so this was around the crack epidemic. And so if you stayed at the stoplight too long, it was the same stoplight where the dope dealers and the dope boys hung out, where the bus stop was. And if you stayed at the corner too long at that stoplight, they would literally come up to your door or to your window because they thought you wanted to buy crack. And so I grew up in this environment where, it was around. It was the crack. It was the killings. It was the gunshots, to where I remember moments of just having to duck at night. And I thank God that I did not become a product of my environment. I do remember that one particular time where one of the dope boys, because when you grow up in an environment that you don't know the level of demonic detriment that kind of and just takes over a space. You grow up in it, you think it's normal. And I remember, the dope dealers, they weren't friends, but they were known. We had conversations with them. We talked to them. They were around. We didn't get involved with them, but we couldn't avoid them. And I remember one particular day, I won't say the person's name, but one of the dope dealers, I remember he actually asked me and used me to actually climb through the window of someone's house. This is when the PlayStation had first come out. And he asked me to climb in the window, and he manipulated me because he said, this window, we couldn't get into the house or whatnot. And for whatever reason back then, I knew whose house it was, but whatever manipulation he used to say, we need to get in, we locked the door, whatnot. And so I climbed in through this small bathroom window, as I was probably no more than like 10 or 12 or something like that. I climbed in this bathroom window, and I went to go open up the door, and the dope boys went in and they robbed him of many things. The only thing that I know for sure that they robbed him of was the PlayStation, because I heard about it later on, and I then learned that I was like a part of that literally robbery. But back then when you're growing up in an environment and you don't know that manipulation is happening to you, but you won't forget what took place. And so that was kind of the environment I grew up in. And then also, I do want to share within the household, that was the external environment. Within the internal environment, what I will share is still not knowing. My mom was I would say my mom, like many people, went through some things that made her who she was. I didn't know this at the time because, again, you grow up with a normal type of character, and you just think that that's them. And she was loving, but what I did later down the line realize is that although she was loving, she wasn't nurturing. She wasn't like a hugger. She was a disciplinarian. We would have to, my mama was the type to where Saturday morning, like many mamas, we are like scrubbing the floor, the baseboards. We are like cleaning. And she was a disciplinarian. She wasn't very nurturing. And she had this way in which she would, when she would get frustrated, the way in which she would talk to us, it's like you felt that. And that was a part of how people knew her. She wasn't the easiest one to talk to. She was a little bit brash. And she was what I recognized growing up is that she was like private, and she was always kind of like, what do you want? Like, what do you want from me? Like, what are you trying to get from me? Even being on the phone with like customer service, when you got to like verify your information, she would, well, why do you need my social security number? Like, for what? So she was very like on edge. And although I recognized that and it was like a regular character pattern that I saw my mom, I didn't think much of it, but I did pay attention to it. And that'll play down the line later on in this testimony. And so internally, growing up in that particular household, it wasn't hostile, but she was disciplinarian. She was a disciplinarian and loving, but not nurturing, loving in a different way. And so fast forward, me, my brother and sister, I got, and I know it might feel like we're going a little bit all over the place, but you'll understand why it all comes together. And I'm just talking about certain moments in my childhood in terms of why it's important now. And so one of the other memories is when I was introduced to pornography at a young age. It was somewhere between the ages of 10 and 12. And I remember on a few different occasions, two of my brothers, one of my brothers, he had magazines in his closet in this black trash bag. And I'm talking about a lot of them. And I just remember being introduced to that and thumbing through them. And my other brother would go over to his house, and I found his videotapes. He had, self-videotapes of him and whoever he was with at the time. And not knowing at the time how it affected you, but it was something in you that when you saw it, it made you want to see more. And so that was the open door. And I don't know how it cultivated, but I do know by the age of 14, I lost my virginity. That, it didn't cultivate into a promiscuous lifestyle because it was still something in me that knew. I didn't know language at the time, and I didn't know it was the Holy Spirit at the time because, again, I accepted Christ at 9. And what I do know about a part of my journey is that there were things that I didn't have language for. I just had these experience of, and later down the line, the Lord would reveal what was taking place. And so I was never promiscuous. I never had this pursuit of wanting to have sex with all of these women like many men, as teenagers and as, young adults. There was this conviction that was there to still want to do right, even though that I was being tempted not to. And so in high school, I remember the summer of my senior year, again, this is the space where hustle man, I was, again, known as class clown. I was pretty popular in high school, and there was one person, he this was the football jock. He told me one day, he said, "Man, you're the cool, smart nerd," because I was about my books. And I remember in high school, the summer of going into the senior year, I had a one-night stand that got influenced from other friends of mine having sex upstairs. And so me and this one lady, and she was the cousin to my friend. They're upstairs. We're just talking downstairs. We hear upstairs, these sound effects, right? And we look at each other. And just by the sound of what was taking place upstairs, in us, it provoked this curiosity of, do you want to? And that was, I would say, I think that was about the third time I had sex. And with that, I didn't have a condom at the time, and she had one. She gave me one. We had sex, and that was really like all that I saw her, because I didn't really know her like that. She was just the cousin to my friend. And so senior year comes, and her cousin comes up to me one day, and she says, "Hey, such and such is pregnant." And this is when life really began to change for me, because I knew young, there were certain things about me that I knew just organically that my spirit bore witness to back then. I knew growing up that I would be working in entertainment. I knew growing up that I was going to get out of Cleveland, because I knew that the city of Cleveland could not hold the capacity to which I was to grow. And I knew I wanted to leave Cleveland. I didn't even fill out any scholarships in Ohio at all, because I wanted to get out of the environment that I grew up in. There was so much drugs around and so much crack around. There were raids that happened where I grew up, and I knew that I didn't want to be a part of that. Growing up, I didn't like drama. I didn't want to be around it, I just didn't like it. And so I was adamant about wanting to leave and to go somewhere else. And so when I have this one night stand, and come my senior year, she says, hey, such and such is pregnant. I remember the very first thing that my thought was, which was so selfish back then as I look back at it. My thought was, and I asked her, I said, well, is she thinking about having an abortion? And when I think back about that, I wanted to get out of Cleveland so bad that I was willing to end another life so that I can keep mine. And that's crazy to think about, but that is the mentality that it was at the time. And so I went into first period, and I'll never forget, my mind just started going. And I remember thinking about the Langston Hughes poem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred? I knew I wanted to get out. I knew I wanted to go somewhere else. And I felt then at 17 years old that my life was over, because I said, I don't want to have a kid. I want to get out. I'm going to have to be stuck in Cleveland. I don't even know how to raise a kid. I'm 17. And I began to bawl and cry in first period because I felt like my life was over. And I talked back with the young lady. We kind of talked through it in regards to kind of figuring out timeline. And I said, well, hey, I'm willing to take a test. We didn't even have the money at the time. We were 17. But I was willing to figure out how to take the test. And when I found out that it was $500, I said, well, I ain't got that. So, I don't know. And obviously I wasn't telling primarily my mom. I wasn't telling anybody about that. And so there was a space where we just basically kind of timed things out. And what I didn't know at the time is that she had a boyfriend. And once we agreed that we wouldn't get take the test because we didn't have the money for it. But we just went through the timeline. And once she actually gave birth, she recognized that it was around the same time. But I wound up finding out that it actually was not my child, and it was actually her boyfriend's. And she even said, well, she actually, the boy actually even looks like her or his father. And so that was a significant thing for me because, again, I thought about the Langston Hughes poem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred, and I thought my life was over. And at that point, I made a very conscious decision that I would not have sex, and that I was not going to be around women because I thought going to college was over. I thought like my dreams were gone. And around the same time, again, back with the selling of the CDs and the pornography, started selling pornography DVDs, and that was because it made money. And, you start selling something, you don't have a conviction about it because the desire and the feeling of getting money made you drown out the conviction of where it comes from. And so I was just selling those. But there was a day where I did go to church. I was, at this particular time, we had transitioned from Freedom Chapel some years prior. The church kind of made a split. And then it was House of Jubilee. And then my best friend invited me to the House of Jubilee. And I began attending them. There's one particular service that really was also another pivotal moment that significantly changed my life and my walk with Christ. And so this particular day, the pastor's wife, she got up and she had this tissue box. And she took this tissue box and she rose it up and she said, there are some of you right now that the Lord is asking you to lay certain things down. And you all know what it is, but because you've been holding it for so long, it's gripped to your hand and you can't let go of it. And this is one of those particular moments in my life where I think how many of us that have a relationship with Christ but wasn't really cultivating our relationship with Christ, where that conviction was undeniable. I could not run from it. I couldn't argue it. I couldn't dispute it. I knew that that tissue box represented the pornography DVDs that I should not have been selling. I knew I shouldn't have been. But again, the love of money and wanting to get that versus be obedient to him was overpowering. But this moment where I had this encounter with this particular sermon, I had a decision to make. The conviction was there so undeniably that I thought that that message literally was just for me. And there wasn't a space to go. There wasn't a space to run. There wasn't a space to resist it because of, as I give it language now, the power and the truth of God coming to your doorstep in such a tangible way where you just have no choice. I mean, you have a choice, but in regards to you knowing the choice you need to make. And so I made a choice that night, and I called my friend Chris, because we were still in the candy. He wasn't selling the pornography DVDs. I was selling the CDs. He was still selling the candy, I believe, at that time. I had moved on. I called him, and I was so convicted. I said, Chris, we gotta stop selling, or we gotta stop stealing this candy. And he had some resistance. And I said, Chris, if we don't stop selling this candy, and if we don't tell, I said, I'm gonna tell. If you don't stop selling this candy, if we don't stop selling, I'm gonna tell. I mean, I was so convicted. I'm just like, yo, I'm giving us both up. That night, I made that decision. And also, I don't remember the timeline, but I do remember I took a black trash bag and I took all those pornography DVDs and I put them in a black trash bag. I put them back in my car. I was a hustler, man. I had my own car by 16, and I put them in the back of my trunk. And I remember they was just there for a couple of days, and I went to my sister's house one day, and I was telling my brother-in-law at the time about being convicted of these DVDs, and he goes and says, he's from New York, he's a hustler, and he's like, no, man, just give me the DVDs, man, let me get them. And I was so convicted. I said, no. I said, I have to throw them away. I have to throw them away. And I was obedient with that. And so I threw the DVDs away. I told Chris, we have to stop stealing this candy. And that was when, at 17, I started my own proactive walk with the Lord. And there was another Sunday at the House of Jubilee where I had my first encounter with the Holy Spirit. And I remember I was in service and worshiping the Lord. And there was this excitement and this joy of worshiping. And then there was like this, I don't even know how to explain it. There was this like burst of fire within me where I started praising like I had never praised before, where I started worshiping the Lord like I had never worshiped before. And there was that 17 years old. And I'll never forget that moment because at 17, I knew what was different because I hadn't had that type of experience before. And so, again, I found out that it wasn't my child. I made a decision that I was not going to talk to girls. I was just going to focus on my books, my career, and that was my focus. I went to college, Clark Atlanta University, and I began to just literally focus on my career. I knew I was going to school for entertainment. I majored in film and television production. My first semester, I had 2 internships, one with the Jamie Foxx Laugh-A-Palooza and another with College Talk, which was where I started my journey in entertainment. And shout out to Andre and Bianca. Bianca taught me how to edit on Final Cut, and went to the Stellar Awards at maybe I think 20. That was my first kind of big kind of production at the time that I was a part of, interviewing all of the gospel greats. And then from there, my I think second semester, my first internship, I got Well, it was like an unofficial internship. The movie you all would know as Stump the Yard today, but I worked on, it was called Steppin' at first, okay? And I worked with a lady named Janelle. I don't know how I met her. I think she was passing out flyers in the mall. They ran a casting company, an extras casting company, and I ran her to the mall. And I was so eager because I knew I was called to entertainment. I knew I would be in it, and I went after it. Met her in the mall, and I said, hey, I'm willing. I'm willing to come out and help or whatnot, because she was looking for extras. I was looking to get my foot in the door. And so I went on set, helped her, began to work with her, and we were, shooting the movie, and I would, go to school, and I would go to set, and was also just involved in a lot of campus activity things that was surrounded around like filmmaking and creativity. And so on the set, I remember one particular day, Janelle asked me, she said, hey, and I know this is somewhat random, but she asked me, she said, can you put on this rabbit suit? And I said, okay. She said, because we were working long hours and we were shooting in the night. I think it was like a Friday type of setup for those that understand production. And so shooting in the middle of the night, and she asked me to put on this rabbit suit to just entertain the crowd because so many extras were leaving because it was a long day and they needed extras for this particular opening scene of Stump the Yard. It was that was Stump the Yard 2. No, Stump the Yard 2 was later. For the first Stump the Yard. And put on this rabbit suit, and I'm just going to entertaining folks to keep folks there, right? And eventually, the director, he winds up putting me in the scene because it called for the scene. And so if you go back and look at Stump the Yard, you'll see this rabbit, and you'll see Columbus Short literally take the head off a rabbit. And so that was like a part of like a highlight for me because I was working in entertainment, and I did not care what it was. I was grateful to be in it. And that was one of my highlights, to be like, oh, I'm in the movie, helping and whatnot. But I was very passionate and driven and dedicated. And so even after that, filmmaking, literally, like at 21, I went to the Cannes Film Festival, had a short film in the Cannes Film Festival, short film corner. And so my point of mentioning this is when I decided to focus on just my career and my comedy at the time, I was doing stand-up comedy as well while doing filmmaking. I was just there. And all of these moments and opportunities would come because I was just here. And I do tell the story that I was wanting to keep my commitment. And I tell folks, during college, I had sex 1.5 times. And I say 1.5 times because there's a small story behind that. One of my brothers growing up, he had one real conversation with me, and he did say to me, he said, listen, I know at some point you're going to have sex. This was prior to me losing my virginity. He said, I know at some point you're going to have sex. When you do, wrap it up. When you do, wrap it up. And I never forgot that. And so, long story short, me wanting to keep my commitment, I did pretty well. But there was somebody that I had a crush on in high school. And so going back to my first semester in college, going back home for winter break, we had met up, and long story short, we were in my car. I went to go see her in my car. We started engaging, and then I heard my brother as we were engaging. Didn't have a condom, but we still engaged. And I heard my brother's voice, and his voice was the conviction, and I literally just stopped. And like literally stopped before even like getting started. And that was the half a time, and I say half a time because we didn't finish. But after that, it was only one other time to where in college where I'd had sex. And I mention that because, again, now today, I've been abstinent for abstinent from sex for 15 years. And I'll mention that. And again, all this is going to culminate into seeing how there are breadcrumbs in God using people and God setting things up because of where he called you. And so college was focused, had some slip-ups, and there was still some conviction there. I was still wanting to chase God, and I wanted to keep my commitment to not having sex, even though in that 4 years, it was a year and a half, or it was 1.5 times. And so after college, there was a few more times that I had had sex. And what I began to learn when I would have sex is that this is the space where God began to speak to me, and I began to hear his voice. And this began to happen through how I like to articulate it is where God began to speak to me through my car. What I mean by that is I start to see this pattern where when I would have sex and or when I would watch pornography or masturbate, because even in college, I was still trying to keep my commitment with that as well, but I was still falling. And so I saw this pattern of when I would start to have sex or watch pornography or masturbate, that things will start to happen to my car. Things started off slowly but surely in regards to small things here and there. It's kind of like, oh, dang, why did this stop working? And then it started getting bigger and bigger. And it was just like, oh, what? Why did this go out? And then like one day I was supposed to go to New York and my fuel pump went out. And then that fuel pump cost $400. And again, things just started gradually getting bigger and bigger. And then I had sex again. And then at this point, I let somebody else borrow my car. And then at that point, like literally the axle on the wheel literally came off while my friend was driving. And thank God that he was safe, he wasn't injured. But that was the moment to where I started reflecting on these things and I said, man, the first kind of mild conviction that had begun to grow was, dang, things are affecting me every time I have sex. Still trying to walk the narrow, but fell again. And so when this axle came off, I started to recognize, dang, when I start to have sex, now it's affecting other people. And I had to begin to internalize this. And there are 2 other major moments where I had sex only 2 more times before I went on this 15 years of committing myself to the Lord, 15 years and counting. And so I remember one day, this was a person, the only person that I had continuous sex with. And what the Lord was showing me at this time was, because I tried to justify my sin, because I wasn't having a whole lot of sex. I wasn't trying to chase women. I wasn't trying to use them. And I wasn't trying to fulfill the lust through women. And I tried to justify that because there was a guy in our high school, and I will not say his name, but Warrensville Heights High School, around my time, people knew this particular person. I mean, he was, and I remember trying to justify talking to the Lord, saying, Lord, but I'm not even having a whole lot of sex. Like, he's had 75 women, he said, in high school. And I said, but I'm not even, and I began to understand later that it was not ever about the number. It was about the covenant that God wanted me to have with him when I didn't even know what a covenant was. And so this second to last time, this was somebody that I was having sex with. I had sex with this person about 5 times. And the last time we had sex, again, as I'm learning, things are happening to my car. Things are getting bigger and bigger. And prior to this moment, I forgot actually, the girl who I had a crush on in high school, she had moved to a different city. She was growing. We were still friends. And even with her, I didn't engage much because, again, I'm trying to grow out of not feeding my flesh. But she came into town one day, and I knew that lust was still there. And we were just going to go out for dinner, but I knew a part of what I wanted to do. And I was so anxious to get there, to be on time, to not mess anything up, because if she came back to the house, it was just like, okay. And so I remember I had a Jeep Grand Cherokee at the time, and she came into town. We said, hey, let's go get dinner at Maggiano's. And I remember taking my Jeep Grand Cherokee, and I shot up the ramp on, if people know Atlanta, on that 400. And at the time, my Jeep ain't had a torque, okay? It was not built to work like an electric car and just to zip. And so what ended up happening is, I didn't know at the time, but as I'm driving, I saw my temperature gauge begin to literally just, and my engine got hot. And now Maggiano's was only up the street from me, but I barely made it there, and I had to stop my car literally in the parking lot of Maggiano's because there was so much smoke, lifted the hood, and some folks got water bottles to cool the engine down. And so what I found out later on after that night, now me and her, that the plans were shot, and thank God the plans were shot. But what I found out later that night is that I blew my head gasket in my car. And so at that point, the engine was cracked, and it was $2,000 to get fixed. And this was a blessing, because this was a time where the Lord used to slow me down, where I can begin to see things that I couldn't see, because as I was always moving, I was always doing something. And so there was a 2-year period where I didn't have a car, where I began to get on the train, and I began to actually see things that I didn't see. What I mean by that is practically and metaphorically. Got on the train, and for the first time, when I'm on the train, I'll open up a book. And I remember just this feeling of I'm more peaceful than I've ever felt, because I was slowing down. And it was about 2 years of not having a vehicle. And I still had the vehicle because I wasn't willing to give it up. I'm just like, well, I ain't got the $2,000, but I'm not about to just, scrap the car, because it can still be fixed. But it sat in the parking lot for 2 years. And so I remember making a decision to say, I'm going to get this car fixed. And before I actually got the car fixed, I had sex with this one friend that I was having sex with on not even a regular, but again, this was the 5th time and the final time. And she had come over to the house, and when she left that morning to go to work, she goes back and she knocks on my door. Now, I mentioned this. My name used to be Jihad. Again, I grew up Muslim, so my name was Jihad. She knocks on my door, and I open up the door, and she said, "Jihad, your car." And at that point, I knew that it was going to be bad. Because at that point, when God is trying to get your attention, and he has to speak so loud for us to hear him, my spirit bore witness that I knew it was not going to be good. I was living in an apartment building at the time in Atlanta, around Lindbergh, and I go downstairs, and that night before, there was a big storm, and I literally go into the parking lot, and the best way I can describe it, it looked like a mini Hurricane Katrina with, so many branches scattered everywhere, leaves everywhere, debris everywhere. And I look in the parking lot. My car is in the back corner of the parking lot. And I go, and as I'm walking and I look up, I see that there is, and I mean literally, there was a 50-foot tree that fell on my car, and it literally demolished my car. And in that moment, I knew, I said, "Lord," I said, "I hear you. I hear you." And it was interesting that, we're talking about a 50-foot tree in a parking lot that's full of cars. And my car was the only car that got hit with this tree. There was a truck to the right of my car that the end of that tree, it damaged the back of the bed of that truck. And I say now, in a joking way, I said, the Lord must be speaking to him now where I used to be, before it got here. And so I took that as a very clear sign that God was trying to get my attention to stop having sex. Now, I didn't know at the time the full reason why, but when I stand here now, understanding what he has told me, what I have learned, how I've been discipled, I'm just like, my God, how you really try to get our attention because we make decisions and we come into agreements with things we have no idea. And he tries to get our attention, and he had to get my attention by literally taking my car away, by destroying the car. And sometimes we as people, we think that destruction is detrimental to our destiny when it's really God's protection, because there is someone else trying to destroy us if we kept doing what we were doing before the destruction. And so I remember it was very clear, and it wasn't until about 2 years later where I failed one last time. Because again, I was on the straight and narrow, and I was just like, nope, not doing it. But we know that the enemy is relentless. And so as I'm wanting to continue to cultivate my life with Christ through the conviction, had inward conviction, had outward conviction, and then I had a display of literally the Lord wanted to get my attention to further that conviction. So about 2 years later, I'm still working in entertainment. I am working on a music video, and at the time I was growing, and a part of my goal in entertainment was to become a producer, and so I was gonna go the AD route. People knew me again in college for my camera, my comedy, and my grades. I always carried a camera around my neck. I had it with me wherever I went. Once I started in production, they said, well, you can't carry a camera on set. Didn't know about NDA and all of that. I just knew I loved documenting. And so I'm like, again, fast tracking my way through entertainment. And if most folks know, back in the day, I used to AD for Mr. Boomtown. And he's very well known in the music video world. And his producer, Jamie Clark, he took a liking to me because I was a go-getter, man. And like Mr. Boomtown, he didn't really have ADs on set. Between him, if you all know certain folks, like BV was the DP, Mr. Boomtown was the director. They had been working together for 20 years with Jamie. They already had that rhythm. And so they didn't really have ADs on set. And I came from a world working in like production, high-level productions. And, you know, I'm working on these television shows and these production companies and whatnot, like bigger budget stuff, even with like Tyler Perry, when we opened up his first studio, like working on these elaborate things. And when the music industry changed, the budget changed. And so you don't have as many crew members. And so for me, as I'm on set working on these music videos, I see that they don't have an AD, and I'm thinking like an AD mind, like, hey, like this can be more efficient if we had an AD. I go and talk to Jamie. Jamie, you know, kind of had a conversation with Mr. Boomtown, and they allowed me to, you know, AD their music videos. And so I begin kind of ADing music videos. And as I'm going through, we're working on, I think it was like either like a Gucci Man or a Young Jock music video at the time. And there was this hairstylist on set. And we met, we just, you know, cordial. She was like a go-getter. She had that cool New York accent and whatnot. And we just became friends. And over the course of 2 years, we were friends. And she comes to Atlanta one day, and we hang out. And that particular night, we wind up having sex. And so at this time in my life, I was still chasing Christ. I was really wanting to grow my relationship. I had conviction, but I didn't have enough discernment and or discipleship to know just how crafty the enemy gets and wants to take you down through whatever open door we will allow, whatever open door is not shut, or whatever is not surrendered to God in his fullness. And so as I'm still growing with him, we have sex, and I was so convicted that I literally stopped talking to her because I didn't know how to process at the time what I was going through, the conviction that I had, and how to articulate that in the moment. And so I didn't talk to her for at least I didn't talk to her at least for a period of time that was enough to where she got offended because she thought it was like literally just having sex and like ditching her. And that was never who I was. That was never my heart posture, nor was that my intention. But again, when you're trying to navigate emotions and you're trying to grow, I was in maybe like 24 at the time. And I remember she sent me this long text. I mean, I'm talking about New York style, like it was bad. And this long text. And I mean, cursing me out. How could you, this and that, this F-bomb, this, such and such. And there was one thing that she said that out of everything that she said, it didn't affect me like what she said here. Because again, I knew that I wanted to walk with Christ at this point. I had enough conviction that I just fell to the trap, to the snare again. And in the text, she said, this and this and this, and F you this, and you such and such that. And she said, you fake Christian. And when I read that, I'm talking about it cut. It cut. And I'll never forget how I responded to myself reading this text. And I said, I may not know who I fully am now because I'm still trying to find my way in Christ, but I know who I'm not. And I ain't no fake Christian. Yes, I fail. Yes, I may have ditched you, not intentionally, but because I'm trying to navigate my emotions. But one thing I know, I ain't no fake Christian. Now, folks that know me know that I don't like fake, I don't like phony, I don't like fickle. I don't like folks, and also you got to understand for me, I work in the entertainment industry. I see how people want to go and have an agenda for their own personal pursuit. And there was never anything that resonated with me. I cannot stand, still to this day, I have righteous anger and holy righteous anger when I see people wanting to pursue a thing for personal pursuit. Nothing against them, but in this particular cultivation of how God has now grown me into being able to see beyond the habits and the patterns, to see the enemy behind it. I can't stand the enemy. And I can't stand how he uses us through the open doors that sometimes we allow or spaces to where we're born into. And so I've never liked drama. I've always been one that was authentic, that I was real. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm honest. I'm transparent. That's just been me. And so she said, "Yeah, you a fake Christian." I mean, that thing cut, and it affected me. And so this particular night when we had sex, I cannot deny, again, this is why I was so convicted. Why we are in the act of, in my apartment, doors are locked, windows are locked, nobody's there but me and her. As we're in the act, there's a light that comes on in my house. My bedroom door is open, so I see this light come on. And it immediately obviously jolted me. I obviously stopped. And I'm like, yo, I got kind of spooked. I said, I went into my kitchen. I grabbed a knife, and the biggest knife I could find, because I'm just like, and again, I'm real honest and transparent. I'm no clothes, kitchen, knife, butt naked, going through my house, trying to figure out who was in my house. And I remember going, and specifically at the time, and I'm still trying to, grow my language, to align with Christ. I had this knife, and I said, who the F is in my house? Like bucket naked, right? When I think back about it now. And I'm just like, so I go, and I check my front door. My front door is locked. I check the window in my living room. The window is locked. I check the second bedroom. The bedroom window locked. I check the pantry, any place where somebody could be hiding. And I'm like, how did this light just come on in my house? And for those that understand lighting and entertainment, this wasn't no 3200 soft light. This was 5600 white light, okay? For those that understand that, you're going to get that. This was 5600 K. For those that understand, soft light, 3200 is a soft light. In your bedroom, typically, in the kitchen area, you'll put 5200. It's like a white light. This was a white light under my working area from the hallway of my room going towards my bedroom. And this was the very last time where I had sex, because there ain't no way you can tell me that God was not trying to get my attention again before I walked into another covenant that I could not break, because the chains, I believe, would have been too tight, not for God, but for me to actually cry out to him, to call for him, because that word does say he will give you over to a reprobate mind. And so I recognize and I call that moment an undeniable God moment. And I made a decision then and there, and it's been that decision still standing to this day, that I will not have sex ever again until I'm married. And that was my commitment for various reasons. One, because it ain't no way you can tell me that this light just came on. Two, at that time, again, still growing in the Lord. And I knew, based upon, again, my growing up, having a lot of brothers and sisters, understanding the burden, that I didn't want to recreate having all these children and seeing broken families, seeing the struggle of my father trying to be here or be there or do this. Now, I tip my hat to my father wanting to cultivate family, but it was still impossible for my father to show up for his children in the way that a child needs. And so made that commitment. My walk and my journey continued. At this point, the Lord was transitioning me to LA. And that happened by another undeniable God moment. I'm working on the set of Walking Dead as a day player. And prior to, I was working on this show called Teen Wolf. And there are things now that, as I think about it, just grace. Honestly, at this point, I wouldn't work on a show, like Teen Wolf now. I wouldn't work on a show like Walking Dead unless the Lord led me. And that's for reasons why some folks will understand. If we have time, I'll break that down. But I was working on Walking Dead. There was this AD that was from LA because I was still wanting to become a producer. And so he came to me and he said, listen, Teen Wolf is moving to LA. And if they move this show to LA, will you consider going there? Because I think LA would be great for you. If you want to be an AD, LA should be a place for you, because LA was unionized. In Georgia, we were non-union, so it was different rules. And as an AD, you need to know those Jeffers rules. And so he said, will you consider? Well, my response had some resistance, because when I was working on Teen Wolf, the second season, it was not the best season for me. There weren't many black people working on that show. There were only a few of us, a handful of us. And so there were moments on Teen Wolf season 2 where I call it my year of first. First time where I wanted to quit a show. First time where I wanted to walk away from entertainment. First time where I got thrown under the bus. First time where I almost got arrested on set. First time where I said F my bosses. And the first time where I was just questioning God. I know you called me to entertainment, but what is going on this particular set? And it wasn't a bad set. It was just throughout season 2, it was, it was just a lot of stress on set. Some of that came to my door. Some of it I misinterpreted, but it made me question. And so I didn't have the greatest time season 2, and it made me question, God, I know you called me to entertainment, but what's going on here? And so when I'm asked this question, well, if we go to a season 3, will you consider it? And so I told this AD, Austin, I said, I'd consider it. And right then and there, he left. He went to go talk to the other ADs, Jeff January and JD Taylor. And he went to them. And, well, he went to Jeff January first, actually. And he said, hey, my initials were Jay-Z at the time. Whole nother story. My initials, long story short, I grew up, my daddy He named us all. He was intentional about that. He said, take your name seriously. And so because my old name was Jihad, people would spell my name wrong. And so I just went by my initials, Jay-Z. Had nothing to do with, Sean Carter, but that were my initials. And he went to Jeff Jarrett and he said, hey, Jay-Z wants to go to LA. Will you take him? Jeff January, we had worked together before on team with prior while we were working on Walking Dead. He said, well, yeah, I would love to have him. I wouldn't mind, but I have to run it up the chain. I have to ask the other AD. And so we'll see. 3 months went past. Didn't hear from them. I'm going about my life. I'm 25 at the time. I'm about to move in my own apartment. And when I tell you, I was ready. And so I went about looking for my apartment. And the apartment was amazing. It had a built-in, or had a basketball court on the premises. I grew up playing basketball. It had a built-in jacuzzi on the premises. I'm like, word, bet. My apartment, it had this built-in bookshelf, and I love to read, and I'm just like, yo. And they had valet trash. And I didn't know what valet trash was at the time. And I'm just like, yo, wait, they come pick up my trash? Oh, bet. Let's run it up. Bring the contract. Let's go. And so we set an appointment for Friday, 12 o'clock, sign these papers. I'm moving into my own apartment. And so fast forward, I go Friday, 12 o'clock to meet for the appointment. And still to this day, I have no idea why he did not show up. There was a lady that was there in the office. She said, well, I don't know why he's not here either. And she goes, well, just come back on Monday. We'll sign it. I said, bet. I'll come back on Monday, 9 o'clock, sign these papers. Cool, bet. And before I can go and sign this lease a second time, Monday, I get a phone call Sunday. After 3 months, the phone call came Sunday before I legally signed this lease. They said, hey, listen, everything in LA is taken care of. We can bring you on. This is the rate. Are you still interested? And I knew at this point with my walk with Christ, I was sensitive enough to know that that was a divine interruption and that there was a reason for me being in LA. I didn't know the reason, but I knew ain't no way I'm supposed to sign a lease on a Friday and the guy just don't show up. And then when I'm supposed to sign a lease again, that now I get a phone call Sunday disrupting that particular agreement. And so I make the commitment. I'm moving to LA. I got a month and a half. I pack everything up, and I have a going away party because at this time in the industry, things were shifting. Atlanta was not in a space yet to where it is now. 2008 is where things shifted. The tax incentives passed, and things were starting to roll and get good in Atlanta. And so folks were asking me, why are you leaving? And there was a couple of reasons, and it was like, well, I want to grow in a different market, and I know that this is where God has called me. And so I had a going away celebration, and a producer friend of mine pulls me to the side, and she said it casually. But again, if you know how God uses people to tell you certain things that you may not know the full measure of in the moment. And so she pulls me to the side and she said, hey, listen, you're going to LA for something bigger than you realize right now. Said it casually, but when she said it, I was like, yo, there's something on that. Now I was in the flesh a little bit, but I was also in the spirit a little bit. So I did take it as knowing that something is changing and is going to be big. I thought initially it was going to be my career because I was so focused, entertainment, going here, going there, working with Tyler Perry, working over with Will Packer, Rainforest Films, Rob Hardy, working on American Idol, working all this big stuff, right? And so I'm moving to LA, and it's going to get bigger. And the moment that I kind of touched down in LA, I see these mountains. I had my car shipped here, and I see these mountains, and I never forget, I'm driving down La Cienega. I was like, yo, I live in LA. And the very first week that I moved to LA, a friend of mine, Katie, I don't know if we can, well, I've been saying first and last names of all the folks that's been involved in my journey. But I definitely want to say thank you to Katie Casper because Katie invited me to church. And I was already in church in Atlanta, but God transitioned me here. And so I went to this church, and I obviously wanted to find a church here, and she brought me to this church, and honestly, church wasn't for me. It was, for me, a dry service. It didn't resonate with me. But what did resonate with me or what took place after the service. And the pastor, he got up and he said, I feel like there's a prophetic moment that needs to take place right now. And I just want to pray into this and just allow the Holy Spirit to do what he does. And so somebody came up to me. He prayed. Somebody came up to me and he began to speak to me. And he began to tell me things that only me and God had talked about. And at this time, I had never really known about the prophetic. And there was only one other encounter that I had with the prophetic in regards to somebody coming and prophesying to me. And this person comes up to me and he says, there are some things on your life that God wants to do in such a big way. And I won't share the full prophecy because some things need to be protected. But he said certain things to me that I know only me and God had talked about. And I'm crying tears because I said, who is this man? I know you from nowhere. And you're telling me things that I know for sure that only me and God had talked about. I told no one else. And I'm bawling, crying on the floor, and I'm snot-nosed, or at least I think I am at this point. And God still wanted to do another work in me that I call, again, an undeniable God moment. And so as I am literally on my knees, crying, snot-nosed, my friend who invited me to church, Katie Casper, she comes over. She lays her hand on my shoulder. She looks me in the eye, and she goes, I feel like God is saying right now to you that he just wanted me to tell you that he's proud of you. And I begin to bawl and cry. Because there's something that when God speaks to you through someone else and your spirit bearer witness, you know exactly what he's talking about and why he said it. And so for me, I made a commitment to follow Christ, and I was falling here and there. I had the conviction the last time I had sex was with this young lady from New York. But I was still struggling with my pornography and masturbation, wanting to seek after him, but still falling. And I was condemning myself. I was, that space where we accept the lie of the enemy and we start to accept, oh, you can't or you won't and you'll never. And the moment that the Lord said he's proud of me, I knew he was talking about me continuing to fall. And I knew in that moment that he was telling me, I see you, son. I know your heart is for me. And that day, I remember that was the day that I understood truly what it meant for him to die on the cross for me. Because never again after that day did I have self-condemnation or self-condemning thoughts. And that was the day that I understood, I knew it conceptually, but then I understood it experientially. And I said, this is truly why you died for me. So that I don't walk around with a weight of guilt that you never assigned to me. And I don't know about you all, but I know that there are people listening to me right now that are under this false guise of guilt, where you are chasing after God or where you may have moved away from him, and the enemy is in your ear saying that you're never, that you won't, that you can't. In that moment that I had with the Lord saying, son, I'm proud of you. I believe that he's telling you that right now. Because the love of a father will never stop chasing after his kids when they go astray. And at that time, I didn't even know what being a true son of Christ was. I didn't know. And I'm having this moment now, and I'll tell you about it later. I didn't know what it meant to be a son. I had my father in my life. I would see him on the weekends, But my father wasn't a nurturer either. My father was a talker. He was a communicator. That's how he expressed his love. But in terms of being a son, didn't know. And I think many men struggle with being men, but not even knowing how to be true sons. And so he tells me this, and it gave me so much relief because I was just like, man, I'm never going to be able to get out of this cycle because you have a love for Christ and you want to walk towards him, but you keep falling. And then you go into this cycle of, man, I fail, and then the thoughts come, and it's just like, am I ever going to get out? And my journey still, even after that moment, was still like 12, 13 years. And even to this day, I'm only, I would say, truly, when the very last time, because I went through deliverance multiple times, but it's understanding how deliverance works. It's a lifestyle. It is a lifestyle of continuing to kill the flesh. But in that moment, that's when things begin to cultivate even more at a deeper level. Understanding that the true blood of Jesus Christ that died on that cross was for me not to ever, ever say again that I can't, that I won't, that I will not. To accept the lies of the enemy, that I would stay in this cycle of pornography and masturbation, that I would be torn in this place, that I could not live a life of purity, that I did not have to accept. And so I continued this walk with Christ. And my battle no longer was the sex. My battle now, where the enemy tried to continue to keep me, was through the pornography and the masturbation, the lust. And not lusting after women, but in a way that I didn't know was there. Fast forward, I moved to LA. I had that encounter, and I find a church home. I was at, it was called One Church at the time. And God knows us, because when I left from LA, he knows where he needs you, with who he needs you to become, and where he needs to plant you. Now, this particular part of my testimony, when God was cleaning me up and growing me and cultivating me, I was at Elizabeth Baptist Church in Atlanta. And I was growing there. I got introduced to a men's ministry when I'm walking with Christ. And I didn't know what that was. I never knew that men got together and they got vulnerable and they talked about their faults and their failures. Never knew. And so I get introduced to this men's ministry where God begins to grow me even more, where he begins to show me what manhood really looks like. A friend of mine, Walter, and I'm giving these names because I want to make sure that I give flowers to the people that God uses in my life and has used in my life for me to be who I am today. Because he will use people. He will bring people. And as we continue to submit to him, he'll cultivate us at our acceptance of his acceleration. He can accelerate us as fast as we want. But when he sends people, it is, will we listen? Will we lean in? And so Walter, he invited me to this men's ministry. I accepted. I started going. I started growing. I started to see men in a way that I'd never seen them. I grew up with primarily women. I didn't have male role models. And so I began to understand what it looks like. I took this course called A Quest to an Authentic Manhood, one of the most transformational courses I've ever taken. Because this course, 24 weeks, it was about unpacking the unconscious wounds that we as men walk around with, and we don't deal with them, we don't address them, we don't get healed from it. In this particular course, it made me acknowledge things that I didn't know was there. It helped me to see things that I didn't know was deep down inside, because we know that the enemy will try to get us young, will try to place pain and hurt and guilt and shame and all of these things within us and have no outlet to express it, have no money to go and to do therapy, or have no particular lifestyle to have enough peace to go before our Father, our Abba, to get revelation about what we're dealing with. And so I'm in this men's ministry, and I begin to hear from other men. I begin to learn. I take this course, and I find out that I have unconscious wounds with my mom. I have this unknown resentment from my father. And I remember this course helped me to forgive my father for resentment that I didn't know was there. And so when God transitioned me from Atlanta to LA, I was afraid because I had never been in a space like this that was feeding me in the way that I had never been fed before. And I was kind of like, okay, God, I know you're moving to LA, but what about men's ministry? Like, what are we gonna do? Like, I don't want to leave this. But I was obedient in leaving. And so I went to the Potter's house, or one church at the time. I go to a service, I listen to PT, and my spirit begins to bear witness because he actually, it was on a Father's Day, and he does this Father's Day message, and it resonates. And then I said, okay, Lord, I think this is where I'm supposed to be, but I'm going to come back. Because y'all know, we want 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 confirmations for the Lord, okay? And so I said, I want to come back. I came back to another service, and this particular service, he closed out the service in the same way that my old pastor closed out the service. And I knew at that point, I said, I know that I'm home. Soon after, as it be the Lord, I find out that PT was just starting a men's ministry. And so when I look back, I said, dang, the Lord met me. He knew where I needed to be. He planted me, and he also gave me the desires of my heart. Now, this was important to me. And I grew in 2 years of being in LA. I grew more in 2 years than I did in the last 5 years in Atlanta. And this is why I tell people, I say, listen, I love my church, and even where I'm at now, I love my church, but go to where God plants you. Not going based upon proximity, not going because your friends go there, not going just because it's great worship and the word is great. Go there because God is telling you to go there. Go there because God is planting you in a certain soil. Because you can grow in soil, but you will not grow properly or at the rate God wants you to grow if you're not in the proper soil. And so I grew in 2 years more than the last 5. And God began to show me things, and he began to cultivate me. And meanwhile, again, I'm working on the show Teen Wolf, and I'm still like Focus Entertainment. And once we started this men's ministry, I began to get fed in a way I never got fed before, nor in a way that I was getting fed like in entertainment. I knew I was called to entertainment. God sustained me in that, and he allowed me to be fulfilled in that. But then he began to transition me into being fed in a different way through this men's ministry, to the point to where I began to tell, and I began to become bold, because as believers in Christ working in entertainment, we are sometimes afraid to talk about our faith or to tell somebody, hey, I really need to be here at this men's ministry. I know we got this call sheet here that says this is my call time, and I know we might wrap late. And I struggled with that for a minute because I didn't think that they would hear it. But I made a decision because I said, yo, I don't want to miss these men's ministry. I'm getting fulfilled in a way that cannot fulfill me in entertainment anymore. And I went to them, and to my surprise, oh, yeah, we can work that out. And I'm thinking, they can like, no, I'm thinking they might fire me. I'm thinking they, that they were not going to hear. But here is what happens when God sends you to a place. He will place favor upon you to make sure where he wants you is where you'll be. And so they open up that door Tuesday nights. I would get off a set from Northridge, California. I would drive to North Hollywood, and I would get filled in a way that I couldn't get filled in entertainment. And God began to grow me, and he began to take me into these spaces. And this is where God began to show me things where the Bible became real to me in real life based upon the places he sent me to. And so in LA, I began to grow spiritually in ways that I only read about in the Bible. What do I mean by that? I went into these spaces to where I saw the miracles of God begin to take place in real life, where I saw legs grow, where I saw people's eyes healed, where I began to see demonic manifestation, where I began to see demons being casted out of people. Like all of these things that really opened up my eyes to say, oh, I read about this, but now I'm seeing it in real life, and it changed me. It transformed me, and it made me take my walk that much more seriously. And so fast forward, I'm in LA, and I'm going through these spaces, And one thing in terms of why, especially in this particular spiritual climate now, discernment is needed because God may send you to a place, but when he says leave, there's a reason why he says leave.